Next up, we'll get into how you can use JavaScript to enhance your web pages. We'll move not terribly quickly through this. We do have a lot to cover today, but make sure to ask questions if you have any. We'll go deeper into any of these topics. Okay, this starts on chapter 13 is 418 of the text. So we talked about this in the beginning of class, how JavaScript fits in. The client, or the web browser, makes an HTTP request for a web page. And the web page is sent back.
I'm getting number 8.
You guys, just a reminder, make sure you mute your line if you don't have a question. So the web page is sent back, and if it had a link or a script that was pointing back to another file, then like a JavaScript file on the server, then another HTTP request goes out, brings it back, and then the code can execute on the client side. Very different than the normal model where all the processing is done server side. We can do quite a bit on the client side. Here's a very simple example. We have a little bit of JavaScript embedded into a page. So you see a paragraph tag starting here, and then right inside the paragraph tag you see a script tag. Inside the script we have a var keyword which declares a variable called today, and it's being set equal to a new date. When you do this in JavaScript, you get the current date and time. It's kind of like sysdate and Oracle. Then the document object, which is a DOM object. DOM objects are just objects given to you by the browser. You don't have to do anything for them. They're there. We're using a DOM object called document, which gives us access to the DOM to call the write method. And we're writing out a simple string, which technically could have been put in the paragraph tag since it's, there's nothing dynamic about this. But immediately following that, we use document.write. This part is dynamic. We're accessing our variable today. We're using the dot to get to a method or an embedded function within our object, which is a date object. So this is a built-in method of the date object. To date string, and you see another one down here, very similar, getting date, this time getting full year from date. And if you render this in a browser, it looks something like this. Here's your string, and then here's the full year. This particular technique, I think, was used quite a bit in the early days of JavaScript when it was beginning to become popular. You don't see this so much anymore. This kind of thing can be done on the server side now. You can send out the current date and time using a script on the server side. But it does illustrate that it is possible to manipulate the DOM even as the page is loading, which is pretty interesting. Here we have some basic code for a web page. It's hierarchical, as all HTML is. Starting with the doc type, we have the HTML, then we have the head and the body. Inside the body, we have an H1, a P, an H2, an unordered list, and a P. And inside the unordered list, we have some list items. When your browser grabs this HTML document, and you can imagine the document streaming across the web, the browser is getting it bit by bit and starting to parse through it. And as it's parsing through it, it starts to create what's known as the DOM tree, which is the in-memory representation of that document. And we saw just a moment ago the document object, the document DOM object in JavaScript, which provides us access to this DOM. So DOM.write actually adds new content into this DOM tree. And you can see it's very much like the web page was, hierarchical in nature, and you can access all the regular elements as well as text nodes, as you'll see in some examples coming up. This is a page that has a button embedded for printing purposes. And it's pretty common to see something like this. The user is going to click a button like this, or maybe they enter something on the keyboard, maybe they move the mouse. There's all kinds of different events that can occur. In this case, it'd be the click event on the button. And of course, we're going to see some JavaScript code that can respond to that click event. And the way this typically works, the page is loaded and some kind of event will occur. Lots of different events can occur. Attached onto that event is some script, so the script then executes. If the script was coded to modify the DOM, then the DOM gets updated, and then the browser goes ahead and updates the page that the user is looking at. And you just keep going through this loop. This is pretty much how the DOM event cycle works. A couple different ways you can add JavaScript into your applications. There's an example here of putting code right in the head. This is very common. You see some script tags embedded in the head. This is the first time we're seeing a function. JavaScript is a function-based programming language. It's not really object-oriented by design. It's function-based by design. It's technically a function-based language with prototypal inheritance, but that's not something we'll get into today. There's two basic ways you can create a function. This is one of the two. You'll see the other one a little later. You start with the function keyword and you follow that by the name of the function, and then you can specify any optional parameters you like. Then you have the open curly brace and the close curly brace. And whatever goes in between is your function body. Here you see that we're accessing window, which is the global DOM object, and then we're accessing the print method of window. So this is the name, print TOC, and then typically what you would do, maybe in the body, you would have an input. And in the input, which as you see here is the button we were looking at in the previous page, you register what's called an event handler. So this is on click, and then you just put in the name of the function, followed by parentheses. And the parentheses are important here. Without the parentheses, you just have a reference to a function. The parentheses are the invocation operator, so you're actually invoking the function at this point. This is the original way, by the way, going back to the earliest days of JavaScript, that you would register a function with an event handler. This is called an inline handler. It's directly inline with the element, just like an inline CSS rule with using the style attribute. Two different script element attributes you need to be aware of. Source just points to where the file is located. And type, although still commonly used, it can now be omitted with HTML5 because the default is text/JavaScript, but you will still see it used quite a bit for backward compatibility. It's really not necessary anymore, though. Here you see a couple examples of using this. The first, we see a JavaScript file. So you'll normally find these in the head section of a document. But a lot of people argue that that's the wrong place to put them, and instead move them down to the very end of the document, right before the end of the body. In general, the idea of moving them to the bottom is a better idea. And the only time you wouldn't want to do that is if the code needed to be executed before the rest of the document was parsed. That's very, very rare that you would need to do that. But a really simple example is the shiv or the shim technique we talked about earlier in class, where the JavaScript code is used to add elements to the DOM that didn't exist, like section, right? So that was something you would need to go in the header so that it could build those elements before the rest of the document's parsed. But for the most part, most other code can go at the very end of the document. Here you see, rather than a separate file, you just see some regular code embedded in the head section, again that print function. And finally, you see that you can embed JavaScript pretty much anywhere. This is another example in the body, accessing the date object and then writing that out to the document. There's a no script tag, and this is a simple example of how one might use it. If the script, JavaScript, is enabled for the browser, then this code here will execute. And it'll get today's current date and write that out then to the document. If JavaScript is disabled, then the browser will just skip this. But when it gets to this no script, it will go ahead and go through it, and you'll see this content come out instead. This example I don't think is very common. You actually see this used in Apex. Let's see if they fixed a little bug. 4.2. I'm going to disable JavaScript. Oops.